At 3:47 a.m. on December 14th, 1944, Corporal Eugenio Neo Salazar of the 11th Infantry Regiment, Philippine Commonwealth Army, crouched behind a collapsed coconut oil processing shed on the northern shoreline of Leyte Gulf, watching 17 Japanese landing craft approach through pre-dawn fog at approximately 800 meters distance, the smell of rotting copra mixing with salt air. Tied to his belt was a waterproofed bamboo cylinder containing 12 kilograms of TNT, blasting caps salvaged from unexploded American ordnance, and a pressure trigger mechanism assembled from parts of a broken water pump. A weapon every officer who had seen it called suicide engineering and refused to authorize. The nearest friendly position was Lieutenant Mendoza's machine gun nest, 200 meters south along the beach, currently silent to avoid revealing positions. In approximately 8 minutes, those landing craft would reach the shallows, disgorge 300 to 400 Imperial Japanese Army troops, and collapse the entire defensive line that had taken 3 weeks of brutal fighting to establish. They said a guerrilla farmer with a 6th grade education couldn't build a working naval mine. But tonight, the ocean itself would become his weapon. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening to this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments right now, and let's see which corner of the world has the most war legend fans. Don't just scroll, type it out. Your comment might get featured in the next story. The cylinder shifted against his hip as he moved forward through knee-deep water. The tide was coming in. Yet Neo could feel it in his bones before he could see it. The way the current changed direction, the way debris began floating toward shore instead of away, the way the water climbed half a centimeter higher on the mangrove roots with each passing minute. It was the same instinct that told him when the irrigation pump at his family's farm in Palo was about to fail, when pressure was building wrong in the lines, when metal was stressed beyond its tolerance. That instinct had kept him alive through 6 months of guerrilla warfare. Now, it would either save 73 Filipino soldiers holding this beach, or kill him in the next 10 minutes. The Japanese boats were running dark, no lights, minimal engine noise, riding low in the water. Type A landing craft, probably. Neo had seen them before, during the initial American landings back in October. It watched through binoculars as they ferried troops ashore, memorized their silhouettes, their draft depth, their approach patterns. He knew their hulls were thin steel, vulnerable below the waterline, where armor was minimal to reduce weight. He knew because knowing things, really knowing them, understanding how they worked, had been his entire life. The device at his hip represented 3 weeks of argument. "It's fucking insane, Salazar," Lieutenant Mendoza had said when Neo first showed him the prototype. "You want to swim out into the middle of a naval approach route with a contact mine strapped to your body?" "Not a contact mine, sir. Pressure triggered. Detonates when water displacement above threshold." "I don't care if it detonates when you sing it a fucking lullaby." The answer is no. But that was before supply lines got cut, or before the ammunition ran low. Before they realized the Japanese were planning a major counter-landing to retake positions lost during the American advance inland. Before no stopped being an option anyone could afford. Neo waded deeper. The water was warm, almost body temperature, which meant he wouldn't get hypothermia quickly. Good. He'd need at least 20 minutes in the water, maybe more, depending on where he could position the device. The bamboo cylinder was positively buoyant, intentionally, which meant he could swim with it, use it almost like a flotation device while maneuvering into position. Behind him, the beach was silent. 73 men, 2 heavy machine guns, maybe 400 rounds total between them. No artillery support, no air cover, no naval assets within 50 kilometers. Yet the defensive position was a joke, a thin line of foxholes and improvised bunkers stretching along 600 meters of shoreline, backed by nothing but open rice paddies and a single dirt road leading inland toward the American-controlled town of Tanawan. If those Japanese troops established a beachhead here, they'd cut the supply route. If they cut the supply route, the entire northern flank collapsed. If the northern flank collapsed, 2,000 American and Filipino troops would be surrounded, cut off, destroyed, all because of 300 Japanese soldiers in 17 landing craft. The math was brutal and simple. Neo checked the device one more time. The bamboo cylinder was sealed with pitch and wrapped in salvaged canvas, treated with rubber tree sap, completely waterproof, tested multiple times in the Gulf over the past week. Inside, in the T-HOM NT was packed in sawdust to prevent sympathetic detonation, with blasting caps positioned at 3 points for maximum fragmentation. The pressure trigger was the clever part, a modified water pump piston connected to a mechanical timer, calibrated to detect the pressure wave of a large vessel passing overhead. When a landing craft passed above, when several thousand kilograms of steel and men and equipment moved through the water, displacing volume, creating pressure, the piston would compress. Once compressed past a certain threshold, it would release the timer mechanism. 2 seconds later, the blasting caps would fire. In theory, Neo had tested it 4 times with smaller charges. 3 successful detonations, 1 dud, 75% success rate. Yeah, those were terrible odds for a weapon that required swimming into an enemy approach route and manually positioning yourself in the path of 17 boats, carrying men who would shoot you on sight. But terrible odds were better than no odds at all. He was 50 meters from shore now. The landing craft were 600 meters out, engines barely audible, just a low, mechanical hum beneath the sound of small waves. He could see their silhouettes more clearly now. Type A boats, definitely, each capable of carrying about 20 troops. 17 boats, roughly 340 soldiers, plus crew. All of them about to sail directly over whatever position he could reach in the next 6 minutes. Neo took a deep breath and dove forward, swimming underwater, pulling himself along with strong, efficient strokes, learned in the Palo River as a child. Just the device trailed behind him, tethered to his belt with nylon rope. Waterproof, positively buoyant, 75% reliable. His life in 3 adjectives. Eugenio Salazar was 24 years old, born in Palo Leyte, the 3rd son of a coconut farmer who supplemented his income by maintaining irrigation equipment for wealthier landowners. He had 6 years of formal education, ending when his father died, and someone needed to take over the pump maintenance business. By age 12, he could disassemble and rebuild any water pump in the province. By 15, he was the person farmers called when engineers from Manila gave up on a problem. He had no military training before the war. When the Japanese invaded in 1942, Neo was 22, working as an assistant to the municipal waterworks supervisor in Tacloban. And he fled inland with thousands of others, spent 8 months moving between villages, eventually joining a guerrilla unit operating in the hills west of Palo. They gave him a rifle he barely knew how to use and assigned him to courier duty, running messages between camps, ferrying supplies, occasionally helping with ambushes by carrying ammunition. He was competent, reliable, completely unremarkable. Salazar's the kind of guy who shows up on time and doesn't complain, his unit commander, Captain Reyes, once said. Give him a task, he'll complete it. But don't expect tactical brilliance. He's a farmer who knows pipes. That assessment lasted until Neo started modifying equipment. It began small. Their unit operated with cast-off weapons, rusty rifles, stolen Japanese ammunition, and the occasional American supply drop that never contained enough of anything. Equipment failed constantly. Magazines jammed. Firing pins broke. Grenades proved to be duds. Standard military procedure was to discard broken equipment and scavenge new gear, but scavenging required raids, and raids cost lives. Nio started fixing things. A rifle that wouldn't cycle correctly? He'd spend an evening with files and springs, adjusting the gas system until it ran smoothly. A jammed machine gun. He'd disassemble the entire mechanism, identify worn parts, fabricate replacements from scrap metal using hand tools and a charcoal forge. Grenades that didn't detonate? He'd carefully extract the explosives, repack them with proper fusing, create weapons that actually worked. How do you know how to do this? Lieutenant Mendoza asked. Joe, watching Neo rebuild a water-damaged Browning automatic rifle in 1943. Same as fixing a water pump, sir. Everything's just pressure and moving parts. You find what's broken. You figure out why it's broken. You make it not broken. That's not how military engineering works. Respectfully, sir, I don't know military engineering. I just know things that work and things that don't work. By mid-1944, Neo had a reputation. The Guerrilla, who could fix anything. Commanders started bringing him problems. A radio that wouldn't transmit. A vehicle that wouldn't start. An improvised explosive device that kept failing to detonate. He approached each problem the same way. Disassemble, analyze, understand, repair. But understanding led to innovation. In August 1944, and their unit needed to destroy a Japanese ammunition depot without alerting a nearby garrison. Standard guerrilla tactics involved direct assault, throw grenades, shoot rifles, hope the ammunition inside caught fire before the Japanese counterattacked. High casualties, low success rate. Nio suggested something different. A time-delayed incendiary device using a modified alarm clock, kerosene, and white phosphorus salvaged from Japanese smoke grenades. You want to build a bomb from a clock? Captain Reyes said. Delayed action incendiary device, sir. We position it, set the timer, withdraw to safety. When it detonates, the white phosphorus ignites the kerosene spreads fire, the fire reaches the ammunition. By the time the Japanese respond, we're 5 kilometers away. And if it doesn't work, then we're 5 kilometers away and nothing happens. Reyes authorized it, mostly because he was tired of losing men. Neo assembled the device in 6 hours, set the timer for 45 minutes, and watched through binoculars from a hillside as the TWO went up in flames at exactly 2:30 a.m., explosions continuing for 90 minutes while Japanese troops scrambled in chaos. 0 casualties on the Filipino side. After that, officers stopped dismissing him quite so quickly. But they still didn't take him seriously. Salazar's got good mechanical instincts, Mendoza wrote in a report to battalion headquarters. Useful for improvisation and equipment maintenance. Not suitable for tactical planning or combat leadership. M's limited education restricts strategic thinking. The report was filed in October 1944, 1 month before Neo proposed the naval mine idea. The idea came from watching American ships. When the U.S. Sixth Army landed on Leyte in October 1944, Neo's guerrilla unit was folded into the hastily reorganized Philippine Commonwealth Army and assigned to defensive positions along the northern coastline. Their job was simple: prevent Japanese infiltration from the sea, protect supply routes, support American units pushing inland. For 3 weeks, Neo watched American naval operations. He watched destroyers patrolling offshore, minesweepers clearing approach routes, landing craft ferrying supplies. He watched underwater demolition teams preparing beaches, setting charges, clearing obstacles. And he watched sailors deploying actual naval mines, sophisticated magnetic devices that detonated when a metal hull passed nearby, expensive military hardware that cost thousands of dollars and required specialized training to deploy. And he thought, I could build a simpler version of that. Naval mines worked on a simple principle: detect a ship, explode near or under the ship, sink the ship. The detection mechanism was usually magnetic or acoustic, sensitive, complicated, expensive. But Neo didn't need sensitive or complicated. He needed something that would sink a lightly armored landing craft in shallow water. Something that could be built from materials available in a war-torn provincial town. Something that didn't require electronics or precision manufacturing. He needed a pressure trigger. Water was incompressible. When a large object moved through it, the water had to go somewhere, sideways, down, creating pressure waves, creating force. A ship passing overhead would create a significant pressure spike in the water column below it. If you could build a mechanism sensitive enough to detect that pressure spike, but simple enough to construct with hand tools, you could trigger an explosive charge at exactly the right moment. Neo spent 2 weeks testing the concept. He built a prototype using bamboo, plentiful, naturally waterproof when properly sealed, TNT from unexploded American bombs, plentiful but dangerous to harvest, blasting caps from Japanese munitions, plentiful if you raided the right supply dumps, and a pressure mechanism built from parts of a broken water pump, plentiful because everything was broken. And the first test used a small charge, 2 kilograms of TNT, positioned 3 meters underwater in a quiet section of the Gulf. He borrowed a fishing boat, sailed it over the device, and waited. Nothing. The pressure trigger hadn't activated. Either the mechanism was too insensitive, or the boat wasn't heavy enough to create sufficient pressure. Second test, larger boat, better calibration. The device detonated 30 seconds after the boat passed overhead. Too late. Third test, refined timing mechanism. The device detonated 2 seconds after the boat passed overhead. Close. But the explosion was off target. Fourth test, improved positioning, adjusted trigger sensitivity. Perfect detonation. The explosion erupted directly beneath the boat, close enough that the crew felt the shockwave, far enough that no one was injured. Have 75% success rate. Good enough. Neo brought the prototype to Lieutenant Mendoza in late November. Sir, I've developed a naval mine that can be deployed manually against approaching landing craft. Mendoza stared at the bamboo cylinder like it was a live cobra. What the hell is that? Pressure-triggered explosive device. 12 kilograms of TNT, mechanical timer, detonates when a vessel passes overhead. Effective against thin-hulled landing craft in shallow water. You built a mine? Yes, sir. Out of bamboo. The bamboo is just the housing, sir. It's waterproof, buoyant, and disposable. The trigger mechanism is steel. I don't care what it's made of, Salazar. I care that you want to swim into enemy-controlled waters with a homemade bomb strapped to your chest. Not strapped to my chest, sir, tethered to my belt. Can I swim out, position the device in the approach route, activate the timer, swim back? When the landing craft pass overhead, they shoot you. or the device malfunctions, or you drown, or all three. Respectfully, sir, if they don't deploy troops on this beach, we hold the position. If they do deploy troops, we lose the position and probably die anyway. This gives us a chance to sink at least one boat before they reach shore. One boat? Out of how many? Intelligence estimates 12 to 20 landing craft if they attempt a major counter-landing operation. So even if your suicide device works, we still have 11 to 19 boats full of Japanese soldiers coming ashore. Yes, sir. But one sunk boat is 50 fewer soldiers. And if we can demonstrate the technique works, we can deploy multiple devices. Mendoza was quiet for a long moment. The answer is no, Corporal. That's not a weapon. That's a death wish wrapped in bamboo. Neo saluted and left. But he kept the device. By December 1944, the situation on Leyte had become what military analysts politely called fluid, and what soldiers called completely fucked. The American invasion in October had gone well initially. Overwhelming force, air superiority, naval dominance. But the Japanese weren't retreating. They were reinforcing. Every night, convoys from Manila and Mindanao brought fresh troops, supplies, ammunition. Every day American and Filipino forces pushed inland against fanatical resistance. Every night, the Japanese pushed back. The northern coastline, Neo's sector, had become a critical vulnerability, as American planners had assumed the Japanese would concentrate their defense inland, around key cities and airfields. That assumption proved half correct. The Japanese were defending inland, but they were also infiltrating from the sea, using small boats and landing craft to insert troops behind American lines, disrupt supply routes, create chaos in the rear areas. The U.S. Navy couldn't patrol every kilometer of coastline. There weren't enough ships, enough sailors, enough fuel. Coastal defense fell to Filipino Commonwealth units, lightly armed, poorly supplied, often commanded by officers with more enthusiasm than experience. Neo's unit, formerly designated Company C, 2nd Battalion, 11th Infantry Regiment, held 12 kilometers of shoreline with 200 men. They had 2 heavy machine guns, 6 light machine guns, and rifles that outnumbered their ammunition supply approximately 3 to 1. No artillery, no air support, no naval backup except 4 occasional patrols by PT boats that showed up unpredictably and left quickly. Their orders were simple: prevent Japanese forces from establishing a beachhead in your sector. Their resources were inadequate. Their prospects were grim. "We're a speed bump," Lieutenant Mendoza said during a staff meeting in late November. "If the Japanese want this beach badly enough, they'll take it. Our job is to make them pay for it. Inflict casualties, delay their advance, give the American artillery time to respond." "How long can we hold?" someone asked. "Against a company-sized landing? Maybe 20 minutes. Against anything larger, 5 minutes, before they overrun our positions." The math was brutal. A Japanese landing force of 300 to 400 troops would outnumber the Filipino defenders by nearly 2 to 1. They'd have supporting fire from their boats, probably mortars, possibly light artillery, if they could get it ashore quickly enough. The Filipino defensive positions were improvised, shallow foals, camouflaged bunkers, gun pits, dug into sandy soil that collapsed in heavy rain. They needed force multipliers. They needed something that would sink boats before they reached shore, reduce the number of troops landing, give the machine guns a chance to actually inflict meaningful casualties before being overwhelmed. They needed naval mines. The U.S. Navy had offered to seed the approaches with actual mines, But that required specialized vessels, weeks of preparation, and then permission from higher command that never materialized because coastal minefields might interfere with American operations. Standard military bureaucracy. Better to risk Filipino lives than potentially inconvenience a future American naval operation. Captain Reyes tried requisitioning explosives for improvised mines, but the request was denied. Battalion headquarters wrote back with a terse note. Explosives reserved for planned operations. No materials available for experimental weapons. Experimental weapons. That's what they called anything that didn't come from a factory with a serial number. So when Mendoza reported Neo's proposal, Corporal Salazar has developed a manually deployed pressure mine. Battalion headquarters responded with predictable skepticism. Evaluation required before authorization. Now forward device to engineering section for analysis. But there was no engineering section. There was one captain with a civil engineering degree who'd spent most of the war managing road repairs, and he was currently 50 kilometers south dealing with a collapsed bridge. Request delayed pending technical review. Translation: no. Neo understood the logic. Authorizing an improvised weapon meant accepting responsibility if it failed, if it killed the person deploying it, if it caused some kind of disaster that ended up in an official report. Easier to say no, safer to stick with conventional tactics, even if conventional tactics meant losing positions and getting soldiers killed. But battles didn't care about approval processes. Intelligence reports in early December suggested a major Japanese operation was imminent. Yet the reports came from multiple sources. Filipino scouts observing troop movements near Ormoc captured Japanese documents referencing coastal operations, intercepted radio traffic discussing boat assignments. American analysts pieced together a picture. The Japanese were preparing a counter-landing, possibly multiple simultaneous landings, designed to cut American supply lines and force a withdrawal from advanced positions. One of the likely targets was Neo's sector. The beach was perfect for landing craft. Gentle slope, firm sand, minimal obstacles. The road inland led directly to American supply depots at Tanawan. If the Japanese could take the beach and hold it for even 12 hours, they could interdict the entire northern supply route. American command promised reinforcements. 2 platoons of infantry, artillery support, possibly an airstrike, if weather permitted. But reinforcements took time to coordinate. Artillery required forward observers and communication equipment the Filipino unit didn't have, and air support was a fantasy, given the monsoon weather patterns. Captain Reyes held a briefing on December 10th. Intelligence believes the landing will occur within the next week, probably during new moon, for reduced visibility. Estimated force, battalion strength, 400 to 600 troops across multiple landing craft. They'll hit us at night, probably between midnight and dawn, when our visibility is worst. Maps showed potential landing zones, approach routes, defensive positions. Our job is to hold until American artillery can range in. That's approximately 15 to 20 minutes from first contact. Yeah, we need to survive 15 minutes against a force 3 times our size. Silence. Recommendations? Someone suggested requesting additional machine guns. Someone else suggested laying wire obstacles in the shallows. A third officer proposed a fighting withdrawal, abandon the beach, fall back to secondary positions inland, force the Japanese to advance into prepared ambush positions. Every suggestion had problems. Additional machine guns weren't available. Wire obstacles would take days to emplace and could be cleared in minutes. Fighting withdrawal meant surrendering the beach without a fight, which would get Reyes court-martialed if he survived. Neo raised his hand. Sir, request permission to deploy pressure mines in the approach route. Reyes looked at him. The bamboo bombs? I thought battalion denied authorization. They did, sir. What? But with respect, we don't need authorization to defend our position with available resources. Available resources includes your life, Corporal. You'll be swimming into an enemy approach route at night with no support. Yes, sir. But one sunk boat is 50 fewer troops landing. 2 sunk boats is 100 fewer troops. If I can position 3 or 4 devices, if you can survive long enough to position 3 or 4 devices, which you won't, because the Japanese aren't blind and you can't swim that fast. Mendoza cut in. Sir, Salazar's point stands. We need something that hurts them before they reach shore. Machine gun fire from fixed positions isn't enough. They'll suppress us with their own weapons and land anyway. But if we can sink boats in deep water, force them to swim, disorganize their assault. Reyes looked at the map. The approach route was approximately 1,000 meters from the likely departure point to the beach. Landing craft traveled at about 10 knots, roughly 5 meters per second. They'd cross 1,000 meters in about 3 minutes. If Neo could position a device 400 to 500 meters offshore, in water deep enough that a sunk boat wouldn't become a platform for troops to wade from, he might actually disrupt the landing, if the device worked, if he survived positioning it, if the Japanese didn't spot him, if. Permission denied, Reyes said. Too risky. We'll rely on machine gun fire and American artillery support. Sir, dismissed, Corporal. Neo saluted and left. But he didn't disassemble the device. The Japanese landed on December 13th, exactly where intelligence predicted. Not the main landing, a probing attacking him 2 boats carrying about 40 troops total, hitting the beach at 11:30 p.m. under quarter-moon darkness. The goal was obvious. Test defenses, identify weak points, prepare for the larger operation. Filipino machine guns opened fire at 200 meters. Both landing craft made it to shore. Japanese troops stormed the beach, established a small perimeter, exchanged fire with Filipino positions for 90 minutes before withdrawing. They left 6 dead and carried away several wounded. Filipino casualties, 2 dead, 5 wounded. Tactically insignificant. Strategically terrifying. They know exactly where we are, Mendoza said afterward. They know our firing positions, our fields of fire, our response times. When they come back with the main force, they'll hit us with mortar fire first, suppress our machine guns, and then land unopposed. Captain Reyes called battalion headquarters, requested artillery support be pre-registered on the beach, mortars positioned to provide covering fire, anything. Battalion headquarters promised to review the request. Translation: no, the next night, December 14th, reconnaissance reported a large formation of landing craft departing from Japanese-held positions near Ormoc. 17 boats, 300 to 400 troops, ETA to Neo's sector, approximately 90 minutes. This was the main assault. American artillery was notified, but reported they were currently supporting operations 10 kilometers south and couldn't reposition quickly enough. Air support was unavailable due to weather. Reinforcements were en route, but wouldn't arrive for at least 2 hours. Company C was alone. Reyes assembled the officers at 2 a.m. Our battalion says hold as long as possible, then conduct fighting with withdrawal to secondary positions. Artillery will range in once we've disengaged from contact. So we're abandoning the beach. We're not equipped to hold against a force this size. If we try, we get wiped out. If we fall back in good order, we preserve the unit and let artillery do the work. They'll control the beach for a few hours. Then American armor counterattacks and drives them back into the ocean. The logic was sound. The optics were terrible. The Philippine Commonwealth Army retreating before Japanese forces, allowing enemy troops to establish a beachhead on American-controlled territory, needing U.S. forces to clean up the mess. Lieutenant Mendoza spoke quietly. "Sir, Corporal Salazar's mine could still—" "No," Reyes said. "I'm not sending a man to certain death on the off chance his homemade weapon functions correctly. Sir, if we retreat without fighting, if we just abandon this beach—" "We're not abandoning anything, Lieutenant. We're conducting a tactical withdrawal." The distinction was lost on the 73 Filipino soldiers who'd spent 3 weeks digging positions, reinforcing bunkers, preparing to defend this worthless stretch of sand and coral, because someone in command had said it mattered. But orders were orders. The withdrawal plan was simple. Hold initial contact for 5 minutes to make the Japanese commit their forces, then fall back in stages, covering each other, retreating to positions 300 meters inland where they could establish a defense line until American support arrived. Simple. Professional. Now guaranteed to surrender the beach without accomplishing anything except survival. Neo listened to the briefing and said nothing. At 3:15 a.m., 30 minutes before the estimated Japanese arrival, Neo returned to his position near the collapsed coconut shed. He checked his rifle, his ammunition, his position's field of fire. Everything correct. Everything professional. The bamboo cylinder sat in the corner of his foxhole. 12 kilograms of TNT pressure trigger. 75% reliability. Orders were to hold for 5 minutes, then withdraw. Nobody had said anything about not swimming out to position a mine first. Technically, deploying the device wasn't disobeying orders. It was taking initiative within the scope of assigned duties. At least, that's how Neo rationalized it. He picked up the cylinder, tied it to his belt, and then waded into the water. Lieutenant Mendoza's voice crackled over the radio. "All positions, estimated enemy arrival 30 minutes. Hold your fire until I give the command. Acknowledge." Positions reported in sequence. Neo's position was silent. "Salazar, acknowledge." Neo kept the radio off. If Mendoza knew what he was doing, he'd order him back. Better to apologize afterward than ask permission that wouldn't come. He swam forward into darkness. The water was warmer than air. That was the first thing Neo noticed. Body temperature, maybe slightly above, which meant hypothermia wouldn't be a factor for at least an hour. Good. He'd need time. The bamboo cylinder floated beside him, tethered with 3 meters of rope. Not too close. If something went wrong, if it detonated prematurely, a distance might be the difference between death and merely catastrophic injury. Not too far. He needed to maneuver it into position, keep it from drifting on the current. 3 meters felt like a reasonable compromise. He swam slowly, conserving energy, using a breaststroke that kept his head above water and allowed him to watch the horizon. The Japanese landing craft were still distant, maybe 700 meters now, moving at about 5 meters per second, engines barely audible over the sound of small waves. 17 boats in a staggered formation, 3 waves of 5 or 6 boats each. The first wave would hit the beach in about 8 minutes. The second wave, maybe 2 minutes later. Third wave, another 2 minutes after that. If Neo positioned the mine in the path of the first wave, he'd have one chance. If he missed, if the device failed, and if he miscalculated the positioning, the entire landing would proceed unopposed. No pressure. He swam another 50 meters. The shore was 200 meters behind him now, invisible in darkness. The landing craft were 600 meters ahead, slightly south of his current position. He needed to position himself in their approach route maybe 400 meters from shore, deep enough that troops couldn't wade if their boats sank, close enough that he could swim back before the follow-on waves arrived. His shoulders burned. His legs ached. He'd been swimming for 5 minutes and had maybe 10 more minutes of hard swimming ahead of him just to reach the positioning point. Behind him, on shore, he heard Lieutenant Mendoza's voice on someone else's radio. "Where the fuck is Salazar?" Probably someone had noticed his position was empty. Probably Mendoza was furious. Now probably Reyes was preparing a court-martial charge for desertion, or disobedience, or reckless endangerment. Assuming Neo survived the next 15 minutes. He kept swimming. The device had to be positioned precisely, not just in the right location, but at the right depth. Too deep and the pressure trigger wouldn't activate. Too shallow, and the landing craft might see it, avoid it, or simply pass over without creating enough pressure differential. Neo had calculated the ideal depth at 3 meters below the surface. At that depth, the device would be invisible in darkness. The pressure wave from a passing landing craft would be concentrated enough to trigger the mechanism, and the resulting explosion would direct most of its force upward into the boat's hull. In theory, he checked his watch. 3:38 a.m. Shows the landing craft were approximately 9 minutes away, assuming constant speed. He was maybe 300 meters from shore, which meant he needed to cover another 100 meters in the next 4 or 5 minutes, then position the device, activate it, and swim back to shore before the first boats arrived. 4 minutes to swim 100 meters. That was achievable. Barely. Neo increased his pace, switching to a faster front crawl, pulling hard with each stroke. The cylinder bounced behind him, tugging at his belt, throwing off his rhythm. He ignored the discomfort and focused on distance. 50 meters, 75 meters. He was gasping now, sucking air, muscles screaming. He hadn't swum this hard since childhood, hadn't pushed himself like this in years. His technique was sloppy. Too much splash, wasted motion. Now inefficient breathing, but technique didn't matter now. Only distance mattered. 90 meters. 100 meters. He stopped, treading water, gasping. His chest heaved. His arms felt like lead. But he was 400 meters from shore, directly in the approach route, in position. The landing craft were 500 meters out. 7 minutes to contact. Neo pulled the cylinder close, felt for the activation switch, a simple lever on the side of the bamboo housing. Pull the lever, and the internal timer would arm. Once armed, the pressure trigger would be live. Anything passing overhead, with sufficient displacement, would detonate the device, including, potentially, Neo himself. If he didn't clear the area quickly enough, he pulled the lever. A faint click inside the cylinder confirmed activation. The device was live. Now he needed to position it at the correct depth and get the hell out of the area. Neo dove underwater, pulling the cylinder down with him, counting seconds. At 3 meters depth, the pressure in his ears told him he was deep enough. He tied the rope to a loop on the cylinder housing, created a slip knot that would hold the device in place temporarily, but release if tugged hard. The device floated neutrally at this depth. Not rising, not sinking. Perfect. Neo surfaced, gulped air, and started swimming back toward shore. He made it 50 meters before his body quit. Not dramatically, not with warning. His muscles simply stopped responding correctly. His arms moved, but weakly. His legs kicked, but without power. Exhaustion hit like a physical force, dragging him down. He'd pushed too hard. Now he was 350 meters from shore, treading water, had barely able to move, with Japanese landing craft approaching at 5 meters per second, approximately 400 meters behind him. The math was simple. If he couldn't swim faster than they were sailing, they'd overtake him. If they overtook him, they'd either shoot him or run him over. Either way, he'd die. Neo forced himself to breathe slowly, deeply. Panic used oxygen. Panic made everything worse. He needed to be calm, efficient, use whatever energy he had left. He switched to a slower breaststroke, focusing on technique rather than speed. Long, smooth pulls, efficient leg kicks, steady breathing, conserve energy, trust the distance. Behind him, the sound of engines grew louder. At 3:44 a.m., the first wave of landing craft was approximately 300 meters from shore, moving at 10 knots. He's unaware that 200 meters ahead of them, a 24-year-old farmer with a 6th-grade education had just positioned 12 kilograms of TNT directly in their path. Neo was 250 meters from shore, swimming steadily, counting his strokes. Every 10 strokes, he checked over his shoulder. The boats were dark shapes in pre-dawn gray, growing larger with each passing minute. He wasn't going to make it to shore before they caught up. Plan B: dive underwater when they got close, let them pass overhead, hope they didn't see him. Risky. If they did spot him, they'd shoot, but less risky than being on the surface when 17 boats full of soldiers sailed past. At 3:46 a.m., the lead landing craft was 100 meters behind him. Neo filled his lungs and dove. The water was murky, visibility maybe 2 meters at best. He swam underwater, down and forward, counting seconds. His lungs burned. His chest demanded air. He counted to 20, then surfaced as quietly as possible. The first boat had passed him. The second boat was 30 meters away and closing. He dove again. At 3:40 a.m., the lead landing craft reached the device. Neo was underwater when it happened. Couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, initially. What he felt was the shock wave, a massive pressure wave that hit him like a physical blow, squeezed his chest, knocked the air from his lungs. The explosion was directional. Most of the force went upward into the boat. But underwater, sound and pressure traveled differently. The shock wave expanded spherically, carrying energy through the water, compressing and releasing in milliseconds. Neo surfaced, gasping. Where the lead landing craft had been, there was now chaos. And the boat hadn't simply sunk. It had been torn apart. The explosion had ruptured the hull at the waterline, peeled back steel plating, shredded the starboard side. Water poured in through a jagged hole roughly 2 meters across. The boat listed heavily, tilting, soldiers scrambling, some jumping, some falling, all shouting in Japanese. The second boat swerved, trying to avoid the wreckage. The third boat slowed, confused. Behind Neo on shore, he heard Lieutenant Mendoza's voice shouting something, then the heavy, stuttering roar of .50 caliber machine guns opening fire. The second boat exploded, not from a mine, but from concentrated machine gun fire, raking across its hull and deck. Tracer rounds arced through darkness. Japanese soldiers dove for cover or pitched overboard. Chaos. Complete, absolute chaos. Neo swam toward shore. Just the first landing craft, the one Neo's device had hit, sank in approximately 90 seconds. Not immediately. The hull didn't catastrophically fail. The boat didn't flip or explode in Hollywood fashion. Instead, water poured through the ragged hole in steady volume, overwhelming the vessel's buoyancy. dragging it down by the stern, while soldiers scrambled forward, trying to escape, some succeeding by jumping into the water, others trapped as the boat went vertical and slid beneath the surface. 23 Japanese soldiers had been aboard that craft. 7 went down with the boat. 15 made it into the water and started swimming toward shore, approximately 350 meters away, under fire from Filipino positions. On the second boat, the one taking machine gun fire, attempted to withdraw, but turned directly into the line of fire from the second Filipino machine gun position. Armor-piercing .50 caliber rounds punched through the boat's thin armor, shredded the engine compartment, killed or wounded half the troops on board. The crew tried to steer away, but the boat was taking water, listing, slowing. Within 30 seconds, it was dead in the water. Within 60 seconds, it was sinking. 20 soldiers had been aboard. 11 made it into the water. 9 went down with the boat. The third boat, seeing both lead vessels destroyed in the space of 120 seconds, tried to reverse course. The Japanese crews were professionals. They didn't panic, didn't freeze. They simply recognized that whatever they'd expected to find at this beach, they'd miscalculated catastrophically, and the correct tactical decision was immediate withdrawal. But 14 more boats were behind them, already committed to the landing, moving at 10 knots in a staggered formation that didn't allow for quick course changes. The third boat collided with the fourth boat while attempting to reverse. Not hard, just a glancing impact, but enough to disable the third boat's steering and throw troops aboard the fourth boat off balance. Filipino machine guns shifted fire. The fourth boat lasted approximately 40 seconds under concentrated fire before its forward compartment started flooding. Japanese soldiers aboard that boat had seen what happened to the first 2 vessels. They didn't wait for the boat to sink. They jumped into the water immediately and started swimming, not toward shore, but parallel to it, trying to move south out of the machine gun's field of fire. Smart, professional. Exactly what well-trained troops do when caught in a kill zone. But swimming soldiers make easy targets, and the Filipino machine gunners had been digging positions on this beach for 3 weeks. They knew every meter of their fields of fire. They adjusted aim and opened fire on the swimmers with steady, disciplined bursts. Water erupted around the swimming Japanese soldiers. Some dove underwater. Some tried to swim faster. Some simply stopped moving. By 3:50 a.m., 3 minutes into the engagement, 4 Japanese landing craft were sinking or sunk. Approximately 65 enemy soldiers were in the water, and the remaining 13 boats were milling in confusion, 400 meters offshore, trying to understand what had just destroyed their lead elements. And Neo, meanwhile, was 100 meters from shore, still swimming, watching the chaos he'd created. Lieutenant Mendoza saw Neo emerge from the water at 3:52 a.m. "Salazar, get to your fucking position!" Neo staggered up the beach, legs shaking, chest heaving, still carrying his rifle in one hand. He made it to his foxhole, collapsed inside, and immediately started checking his weapon. Mendoza appeared 30 seconds later, furious. "What the fuck did you just do?" "Deployed the mine, sir." "You disobeyed direct orders." "Sir, respectfully, I was never ordered not to deploy the mine. I was ordered to hold my position until withdrawal. I returned to my position. Now, I'm holding it." Mendoza stared at him. In the distance, Japanese landing craft were attempting to reorganize. Machine gun fire continued in short, disciplined bursts. "If you sank a boat?" "Yes, sir." "With your homemade mine?" "Yes, sir." Jesus Christ. Mendoza looked at the water, at the sinking boats, at the swimming soldiers being cut down by machine gun fire. How many of those things do you have? Just the one, sir. I can build more if we have time and materials. How long? Maybe 6 hours per device, assuming I can get TNT, blasting caps, bamboo, and Captain Reyes wants to see you. Right now. Neo climbed out of his foxhole and followed Mendoza to the command position, a reinforced bunker 50 meters back from the beach, half buried in sand, covered with palm fronds and camouflage netting. Captain Reyes was on the radio with battalion headquarters describing the engagement. Yes, confirmed 4 enemy vessels destroyed in the initial contact. Additional vessels withdrawing. Negative. Oh, not artillery. One of my men deployed an improvised mine. He looked up as Neo entered. Salazar, you're either getting a medal or a court-martial, maybe both. Yes, sir. Battalion wants to know if you can do it again. Build another mine? Yes, sir. But it'll take time. Not build. Deploy. The Japanese are regrouping. Intelligence thinks they'll try again tomorrow night with better tactics. Can you position multiple devices before then? Neo thought. Building a single device took 6 hours. But he'd already worked out the design, knew the proportions, understood the mechanisms. If he had help, if other soldiers assisted with basic assembly while he handled the critical parts, he could probably build 3 or 4 devices in 12 hours. Yes, sir. I'll need materials, workspace, and at least 2 assistants who can follow instructions precisely. You'll have whatever you need. Battalion is expediting a supply delivery, explosives, mechanical parts, anything you requisition. Get me 4 functional mines by tomorrow evening. 6 would be better, sir. Then build sent dismissed. By 4 a.m., the engagement had ended. 13 Japanese landing craft withdrew, carrying approximately 240 troops back toward their departure point. 4 boats had been sunk. Approximately 80 Japanese soldiers were dead or wounded, most of them drowned, shot in the water, or killed aboard the sinking vessels. Filipino casualties: 0 killed, 1 wounded, a soldier who'd been grazed by a stray bullet during the machine gun engagement. And Captain Reyes reported the action to battalion headquarters as a successful defensive engagement utilizing unconventional weapons and superior tactical positioning. Battalion headquarters reported it to American 6th Army as enemy landing force repelled with minimal friendly casualties. American 6th Army reported it to General MacArthur's staff as evidence that Commonwealth forces are effectively defending coastal sectors with available resources. General MacArthur's staff probably never heard about it. But the Japanese did. The Japanese attacked again on December 16th, 2 nights later. This time, they came with 19 landing craft, approaching from a different angle, moving faster, trying to overwhelm the defensive positions with speed and volume. Now, this time Neo had 6 devices deployed along a 300-meter stretch of the approach route, positioned at staggered intervals, activated and waiting. 3 boats sank in the first 90 seconds. 2 more were crippled by machine gun fire. The remainder withdrew after losing approximately 120 soldiers. Filipino casualties: 0. On December 18th, Battalion Headquarters forwarded Neo a message from American 6th Army. Request technical specifications for improvised naval mine. Intend to deploy similar devices at additional coastal positions. Neo spent 3 days writing a detailed instruction manual, complete with diagrams, material lists, safety procedures, and deployment protocols. He wrote it in simple English and Tagalog, assuming that whoever read it might have as little formal education as he did. The manual was distributed to 15 Commonwealth infantry companies along the Leyte coast. By the end of December, more than 40 improvised mines had been deployed, sinking or damaging at least 12 more Japanese landing craft. On January 4th, 1945, Captain Reyes forwarded another message. Corporal Eugenio Salazar recommended for Bronze Star for valor and ingenuity in combat. The Bronze Star was a U.S. military decoration, typically awarded to American soldiers, but occasionally given to Allied personnel who distinguished themselves supporting U.S. operations. Neo had no idea how to respond to that. He'd never thought of what he'd done as particularly valorous. He'd simply seen a problem, designed a solution, and implemented it because no one else had a better idea. But metals work differently than mechanical problems. They weren't about what you thought of yourself. They were about what other people thought of you. Lieutenant Mendoza found him working on a new device 3 days after the recommendation was submitted. "You know you're famous, right?" Nio looked up from the pressure trigger he was calibrating. "Sir? Soldiers are calling you the plumber who beat the Japanese Navy. There's a story going around that you swam out with a bomb in your teeth and blew up a boat with your bare hands. That's not what happened, sir. I know that. You know that. But good stories don't need to be accurate. They just need to be memorable." Neo shrugged and returned to the trigger mechanism. Mendoza watched him work for a moment. "You saved 73 lives, you know. If those landing craft had made it ashore, most of us would be dead. You understand that?" "All right. I understand we got lucky, sir. The device could have malfunctioned. I could have positioned it incorrectly. The Japanese could have spotted it and avoided it. But none of those things happened. No, sir. We were lucky." "There's a difference between luck and skill, Corporal." "Is there, sir?" "Because, from where I'm standing, they look pretty similar." Mendoza smiled. "Maybe that's why you're good at this. You don't overthink it." "Respectfully, sir, I think about it constantly. That's how I know when something will work and when it won't." "And your mind worked?" "Yes, sir, 75% of the time." "What happened to the other 25%? "It didn't work, sir." "That's the nature of improvised engineering. Sometimes things fail." "But not when it mattered." "No, sir." "And not when it mattered?" The Bronze Star was awarded on January 15th, 1945, during a brief ceremony at battalion headquarters. Captain Reyes pinned the medal to Neo's uniform, while a photographer from the Army Signal Corps took pictures for official records. The citation read, "For heroic achievement in connection with military operations against the enemy on Leyte, Philippine Islands, December 14, 1944. Corporal Salazar, demonstrating exceptional ingenuity and courage, deployed an improvised naval mine against overwhelming enemy forces, resulting in the destruction of multiple enemy vessels and the successful defense of critical coastal positions. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and the United States Army." Neo accepted the medal, saluted, and returned to his unit. That afternoon, he built 2 more mines. By February 1945, the strategic situation on Leyte had stabilized. American forces controlled most of the island. Japanese forces were isolated, cut off from reinforcement, gradually being eliminated. The coastal landing threat had diminished to almost nothing. The Japanese simply didn't have the boats, the troops, or the logistics to mount serious amphibious operations anymore. Neo's mines had played a small role in that outcome. Not decisive, the war would have been won regardless, but meaningful. Approximately 50 Japanese landing craft had been sunk or damaged by improvised mines deployed based on his design. Hundreds of enemy soldiers had been killed or forced to abandon invasion attempts. Dozens of coastal positions had been held with minimal friendly casualties. And Neo himself had survived. On February 20th, 1945, Neo was promoted to sergeant and transferred to battalion headquarters as a technical advisor for improvised weapons development. His new job involved reviewing proposals from other soldiers, advising on feasibility, occasionally building prototypes. It was the kind of position they gave to soldiers who'd proven themselves valuable, but whom nobody wanted to risk losing in combat. Neo served in that capacity until the war ended in August 1945. After the war, Eugenio Salazar returned to Palo. His family's farm was gone, burned during Japanese occupation, the land redistributed, the irrigation equipment destroyed or stolen. He could have fought for compensation, filed claims with the new Philippine government, demanded something for his service and sacrifice. Instead, he started a small repair business, pumps mostly, engines, and anything mechanical that needed fixing. Word spread quickly. If Sergeant Salazar couldn't fix it, it couldn't be fixed. He married in 1947. He had 3 children. He never talked about the war unless asked directly, and even then, he kept his answers brief. Did you really sink a Japanese boat with a homemade mine? Yes. How? Same as fixing a water pump. Understand the mechanism, identify the problem, design a solution, implement it. But you could have died. So could everyone else. Better me than someone who didn't understand how pressure triggers work. The Bronze Star went in a drawer. He never displayed it. In 1952, an American military historian researching Commonwealth forces on Leyte found Neo's name in after-action reports. The historian traveled to Palo, knocked on Neo's door. He asked if he could interview him about the December 14, 1944 engagement. Neo agreed, reluctantly. The interview lasted 3 hours. The historian took detailed notes, asked technical questions, seemed fascinated by the improvised mine design. You essentially invented a new weapon with no formal training, the historian said. I repurposed existing technology for a specific application, Neo corrected. That's not invention. That's engineering. Most engineers have degrees. Most engineers don't need to build naval mines from coconut processing equipment. If they had degrees but needed to solve that specific problem, they'd probably approach it the same way I did. Understand the physics, identify available materials, design something that works. But you did it under combat conditions. That's when solutions matter most, isn't it?
In engineering during peacetime is just intellectual exercise. Engineering during war is survival. The historian published an article in a military journal in 1954. Improvised Naval Mines in the Philippine Theater, a case study in combat innovation. The article mentioned Neo by name, described his mine in technical detail, included diagrams based on the instruction manual he'd written. Neo read the article once, shrugged, and went back to fixing water pumps. In 1965, a young engineering student from the University of the Philippines in Manila came to Palo, researching his thesis on wartime innovations. He'd read the 1954 article, tracked down Neo through military records, wanted to understand how someone without formal education could design such an effective weapon. Neo invited him in, made coffee, explained the design in careful detail. On the key insight, Neo said, wasn't the explosive or the trigger mechanism. Those are straightforward, if you understand chemistry and mechanics. The key insight was understanding that water is incompressible. When a boat moves through water, it creates pressure. Pressure can be measured. Measurements can trigger actions. Once you understand those principles, building the device is just a matter of available materials and time. But where did you learn about incompressible fluids? From fixing irrigation pumps. If you don't understand how water behaves under pressure, you can't diagnose pump failures. Same principle, different application. The student wrote his thesis, graduated with honors, went on to become a mechanical engineer. Years later, and he would tell his own students, the best engineers
aren't necessarily the ones with the most education. They're the ones who understand systems deeply enough to adapt them to unexpected problems. Eugenio Salazar died in 1987 at age 67 of heart failure in his home in Palo. His funeral was attended by approximately 200 people, family, friends, customers whose equipment he'd repaired for over 4 decades. Also present, 3 veterans from his old unit, including a retired lieutenant colonel named Mendoza, who traveled from Manila specifically to attend. At the reception afterward, someone asked Mendoza what he remembered most about Neo. That he was always calm, Mendoza said, even when everyone else was panicking, even when we thought we were all going to die. Neo just looked at the problem and figured out a solution. Shaman, he didn't care about ranks or regulations or what anyone thought was possible. He just cared about what worked. Do you think he was a genius? No, geniuses think in abstractions. Neo thought in solutions. There's a difference. Geniuses change how we understand the world. Problem solvers change what's actually happening in the world. We needed a problem solver that night. We got the best one alive. In 1992, the Philippine Army dedicated a small memorial at the beach where Neo deployed his first mine. The memorial consists of a bronze plaque mounted on a concrete pillar, inscribed with the names of soldiers who defended the position in December 1944. Neo's name is listed first. The inscription reads, "On this site, December 14th, 1944, Filipino soldiers of the 11th Infantry Regiment defended against enemy landing forces using courage and ingenuity and improvised weapons." Their actions exemplified the resourcefulness of the Philippine resistance and contributed to the eventual liberation of Leyte. Below that, a single additional line: Sergeant Eugenio Salazar, inventor, defender, hero. The memorial is visited occasionally by veterans, history students, and local families. Most visitors spend a few minutes reading the plaque, taking photos, then leave. But occasionally, someone will stand there longer, looking out at the water, imagining a 24-year-old farmer swimming into darkness with a homemade bomb, betting his life that physics and pressure and 12 kilograms of TNT would be enough to change the course of a battle. Usually it isn't enough. But on December 14th, 1944, it was. No one wrote epic poems about Eugenio Salazar. No Hollywood films dramatized his story. So no military academies teach case studies about improvised naval mines in the Philippine theater. His Bronze Star sits in a display case at the Philippine Veterans Affairs Building in Manila. One medal among thousands, noted in records but rarely remarked upon. But in Palo, among the families whose water pumps he fixed, whose engines he rebuilt, whose problems he solved for 40 years after the war ended, they remember him differently. They remember a man who understood that complexity is often just simplicity, waiting to be recognized. That education teaches you what others have learned, but problems teach you what you need to know. That the difference between impossible and merely difficult is usually just a matter of understanding how things actually work. And on December 14th, 1944, when 17 Japanese landing craft approached a defended beach carrying enough troops to overwhelm and destroy a Filipino defensive position, Eugenio Salazar understood exactly how water, pressure, and explosives work. His technique was simple. His legend endures.